The losing streak is over, but you as an Iowa fan, how good do you feel about having a one-game winning streak with a 5-point win against Northwestern? We will talk to you and invite your comments, your questions, your debate topics here at Iowa Hawkeyes Live with Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So we would ask you to head on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm, check out Corey's work and content production there. And depending on where you're watching this particular live stream, we simulcast here at the Voice of College Football on the main channel, but also on the Iowa channel. So head on over there to the Iowa channel and please subscribe. Get us to 1,000 here very shortly as we dig deeper into the football season as the Hawkeyes make it to 7-2. Corey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Mark?
I am good. I'm good. It's certainly interesting as I delve into these teams' resumes and try to figure out, okay, what is this team currently versus what is the totality of their season? And looking at Iowa football, a lot of people were critical of my top 25, as they typically are, and that's fine. But for defending a lot of teams around the Big Ten, and because Penn State had that game against Auburn, linking a number of SEC teams that have a 6-3 record. There are 13 Power 5 teams with a 6-3 record, and that seems to be the record that's kind of on the cusp of whether you could be ranked or not ranked. And that's the reason I bring that up, because I was trying to outline the complexities of working through these rankings. And I had tons of comments. You know, there are hundreds of comments to that video in particular. A lot of people defending or wanting to know why a particular team, and with this glut of 6-3 teams, aren't ranked higher than another team. Nobody mentions Iowa. Why are they 7-2 ranked behind these 6-3 teams? I think that the national perspective on how good this football team is and how good the season has been has changed dramatically in the last 3 weeks.
It has. I mean, let's remember, though, Mark, even when they knocked off Indiana and Iowa State, people were still discrediting Iowa because of how they did that. And certainly those wins don't look quite as good as they did at the time. Certainly Indiana doesn't look good at all. Might be the worst team in the East right now. But, yeah, I mean, I said it the all season. I don't really care as far as rankings. You want to care. I mean, obviously the playoff rankings are what matter now that we have those. At least the mid-season playoff rankings, those are important. But Iowa's not making the playoff anyways, so I don't really care what people say at this point. I understand what they're looking at. Iowa got destroyed 2 weeks in a row by two unranked teams. I think Wisconsin, certainly, if I was ranking. And I don't know that I've looked at your rankings this week, Mark. I normally do look at those, but I'm assuming I would guess Wisconsin's in your top 25 now.
Absolutely.
Am I wrong? Yeah, I mean they're one of the 25 best teams in the country, and they're playing like it now. So, you know, that's not a bad loss, but the way you lose it, you can't be dominated in the fashion they were. Same thing with Purdue. I think Purdue might be one of the 25 best teams in the country right now. Are they in your top 25, Mark?
They are.
Okay, so yeah, I mean those aren't bad teams that Iowa lost to. But, you know, 3 weeks ago, Mark, we were talking playoff for Iowa. Yes. So we're still trying to come down from that, I think. Now, I don't want to shift this conversation, Mark, and I know we're going to talk about Minnesota. Certainly, I'm not asking this in relation to Iowa specifically, but is this the year that we get a 2-loss team into the playoff, in your opinion?
It would not surprise me, and we're certainly headed in that direction, possibly, but I would bet against it, but just slightly bet against it. I would give it a 30 to 40% chance of happening.
Well, this is going to be when we had game day here in Ames earlier this season, which feels like forever ago. When we had that experience, I remember I attended media day with game day and asked, I believe it was it Reese Davis, and I just asked him. I said, you know, Iowa and Iowa State both. This is an interesting pair of teams because both of these teams would have made the playoff already had the playoff expanded before now. And, you know, Iowa in 2015, Iowa State last year. And I kind of think about that as it relates to this year. Both these teams may be, if you would expand the playoff, certainly Iowa State's loss this past week probably would have even taken them out of the expanded playoff race, I would guess, with 3 losses now. But Iowa may end up being, if they win out and we had an expanded playoff, you're probably in. I mean, if you win, I'm talking about winning against Ohio State or Michigan in that championship game, you're probably in the expanded playoff. So there is still a lot to play for. I know we don't have the expanded playoff this year. Iowa's not making the playoff. I'm not implying that. But I saw somebody in the chat did ask, can we still win the West? The answer to that question is yes. The performance this past week, and you tweeted out about it after the game, Mark, it was another struggle. I will say this, and of course, I know everybody in Hawkeye Nation this week is talking about the quarterback position, and I get it, and it's good for views, and I love it. It's fantastic, but like, what's holding this team back, we can see is the quarterback issue has been a bugaboo, but just the fact that Alex Padilla played 3/4 of that game on Saturday, and they were still needing a stop on the last drive of the game to beat a bad Northwestern team should tell people. I know it was Alex's first game out there, but it should tell people that this team has extended problems well past the quarterback position. Offensive line, everybody's, they ran the ball better. Northwestern is putrid in their run defense. It's terrible. So that doesn't prove a darn thing. They do get Cody Ince back this week. Sounds like Kirk Ferentz confirmed that today, so it sounds like he'll be back healthy. I did read, I didn't notice this mid-game. I'm not that in tune. Kyler Schott, I guess, played every snap this past week. That's good news. That's the first time that's happened since he's come back from injury. I didn't notice any huge mistakes from Kyler. So you've got Tyler Linderbaum now, obviously anchoring the middle. You've got Kyler Schott, presumably being a pretty darn good guard, I would think. The bad news is one of those young tackles that has been struggling that needs more time, Mason Richmond, went down and got rolled up on and is out. Who knows when he'll be back? He may not be back. I mean, here we are. We got 3 games left in the season. Kirk was saying it could have been a lot worse, but he may not be back till bowl season. I mean, we just don't know. An injury like that could have been a lot worse, certainly. So they'll get Mason Richmond back at some point. In the meantime, it's Jack Plum, I think, playing left tackle. If Cody Ince is healthy, they may have to go to him because Nick DeYoung and Jack Plum are really the only tackles left as far as guys who have game experience. Tyler Goodson ran well Saturday, but again, I just don't read too much into it against the opponent. I guess we can take this opportunity, Mark, to discuss Alex Padilla, Spencer Petrus, that situation, because I know that's the number one topic out there. Alex played really well, and this is just my opinion. I'm trying not to be a bigot. A lot of these people like to have their opinions and they want to push it on everyone else. And, you're stupid if you don't agree with me. That's not how I am with this. But to me, Mark, Alex Padilla is a starter. All right. Just based on what we saw Saturday.
Okay.
The previous 2 weeks, and you remember me praising Spencer Petrus earlier this year. I thought he had progressed from last year. I talked about accuracy, his ability to take a little off. His fastball, his deep ball had improved immensely. Here's the problem. He has regressed, and that's concerning. Now, a big part of it is the situation. He's a quarterback who doesn't have the intangibles, like a Russell Wilson or a Kyler Murray that can create with his legs and make plays on the run. He needs an offensive line that can protect him and give him time. He needs receivers that are getting open. And right now, he doesn't have. Essentially, the O-line is the issue for Spencer. It's the chicken or the egg thing, which is causing which problem. And I would say it's just both. So I'm not trying to criticize Spencer at this point. I still feel like he did improve. But the problem with this offensive line is it has prompted a regression, in my opinion, for Spencer. He's no longer able to get those deep balls down the field because he doesn't have time, or he's just not comfortable doing it now because he's seeing ghosts on the offensive line. Or opponent's defensive line, I should say. And he's just not making the plays he was making earlier. He's throwing a lot of ground balls, and it sounds like he's hurt. Kirk keeps saying he was banged up and he wasn't able to go fully. I'm not calling Kirk a liar. I have no doubt that he's got an injury, but I don't know why he started the game. Like, if he was throwing grounders I mean, you'd think if he was throwing grounders during the game, he was probably throwing grounders in warmups. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But whatever. However Kirk wants to coin that, I don't care. But Alex came in. He didn't do a whole lot with his legs. So that's one factor where I think he's still got a lot to show there. And I hope Brian and Kirk, they'll figure out a way to get Alex out in space, or Ken O'Keefe, they'll figure out a way to get him on more rollouts where he can actually use his legs effectively. They did roll him out quite a bit, and he made some beautiful throws. And I think his final stat line mark was like 18 for 28 for $182. And that sounds pretty average, but Don Patterson made an interesting point during our postgame show. If that was a Spencer line, people would be pretty excited about that. And I remember more drops Saturday than I remember in recent time for Spencer. I mean, Tyrone Tracy's dropped balls. Sam Laporta's dropped balls with Spencer. But man, Charlie Jones dropped a deep ball from Spencer. Keegan Johnson had a drop in the end zone. From Alex. Keegan Johnson had a drop in the end zone from Alex. Tyrone Tracy had a drop. I mean, there were some significant drops in this game, and you take those away, man, he was looking pretty darn good. He did have a couple bad, overthrows, but I mean, it's his first time out there. And again, to me, I've said this the last 2 weeks. The difference with Alex at this point is his ability to use his legs, and perhaps that can offset some of these offensive line woes.
So my assessment of Spencer Petrus, again, coming into the season, and we made the comparison as Western Division frontrunners, Wisconsin, Mertz, Iowa, Petrus. And you may recall my take was that Mertz started 2020 hot. He regressed. Petrus started slow. He improved. I trust both coaching staffs. Maybe having a little bit more insight into the Iowa football program and the coaching staff have less trust after hearing from you in particular, but also Coach Patterson during this season, have less confidence in that side of the ball from a coaching standpoint at Iowa. But I was just, again, ballparking where I thought these teams would land in the Western Division, being the two front runners and the only two teams that I seriously considered picking to win the division and trying to assess the quarterback play. Now, after watching Spencer Petrus progress or regress through this season, and seeing that he's not a mobile quarterback, so that's not a tool that he has in his toolbox that I would expect when I watch Spencer Petrus play. I think that I'm watching a starting quarterback that you would find in the MAC, at a mid-level MAC school. Like I for being an immobile quarterback, first of all, I don't think he's a very accurate quarterback. I don't think he's atrocious, but so I did, in comparison to that, see some of the Alex Padilla performance against Northwestern. I didn't see all 28 throws. And considering that was his first exposure to the Big Ten, albeit Northwestern, there seems to be more to work with there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know really what you complained as far as the performance. Like, that's why I have been a defender of Petrus in the past, because he is a product of the coaching staff and the offensive scheme too. So, like, you want to get after the quarterback because he's making a bunch of horizontal pass plays, or we're not throwing the ball downfield enough. That's not necessarily Spencer. That's the coaching staff not calling downfield passes and vertical passes. So that's why I've defended him in the past. And you could say the same thing about Alex on Saturday. They really didn't open much up for him. Now, maybe they won't. If they don't, that's shame on the coaches again, because I want to say this. I don't have any reason to think they won't. I'm just saying sometimes the stubbornness of the staff has shined through a little bit too much, in my opinion. I've been outspoken about that, but his ability to use his legs will be a difference maker, I think. Let's also remember, there's another question I saw in the chat. Like, how many games can Iowa win? We can win them all in the West. I mean, they've got Nebraska, Illinois, and Minnesota. Of course, Minnesota first. Those are all very winnable games. Now, they're all losable games. You could lose all three of them. I mean, Illinois has shown that they can beat anybody on any given day. I have a lot of faith in Brett Bielema. to me, he's a tremendous coach. That's why I've got him in my top 5 for top 3 for Iowa's next head coach when that time comes. So that's a game that would concern me. Nebraska's a game that concerns me, although, with Nebraska, I don't know if we want to talk about this, Mark, and I know you do a show with Greg Peterson, and I respect the work they do over, is it Husker Digest? Is that the right?
Husker Online.
Husker Online.
Rivals. Yeah.
Rivals. Like, my interpretation of what happened this week with Nebraska was Scott Frost is just desperately throwing everybody else under the bus in, again, a desperate attempt to save his own job. And I think it's ridiculous. And I don't know that the administration is bought into it as much as they appeared to in their statement, Trev Albert's statement. But, I don't know what that team's going to look like the final week of the season. Are they playing for Scott Frost? Like, to me, if I'm a player, given how he's thrown me under the bus week after week after week, and now he's thrown my position coach under the bus and he's fired my position coach, I wouldn't want to play for that guy. So, maybe there are a group of guys that want to. Maybe the locker room's divided. I have no idea. But that will be an interesting final game. It always is. I think back to 2014 when Bo Pelini was fired. They beat Iowa in overtime. And who was the AD at the time? The clown that said, we don't make our judgments based on how we perform against Iowa. That's basically what he said, because they beat Iowa and they fired Pelini. And it was a stupid comment. And then, of course, they haven't won. They haven't won since, Mark. Haven't beaten Iowa since. So maybe getting rid of Pelini was the wrong thing. But anyways, the season, the storylines are interesting. I will say I texted Don Patterson yesterday and I said, the one coach, if I had to pick a loss, to me, there's no question which game you want to lose. Just from a pride standpoint, you do not want to lose, or excuse me, who I'd rather lose to. I would much rather lose to Brett Bielema, because I know Kirk Ferentz doesn't like PJ Fleck, and I know Kirk Ferentz does not like Scott Frost. Like, it's funny. Kirk has evolved, and that's easy to see why. I'm sure you can figure that out why, just given their personalities. But it's so obvious who Kirk respects and who he really doesn't like. He really respects Pat Fitzgerald. He really respects Paul Chryst. Does not like PJ Fleck, James Franklin, or Scott Frost. So, anyways, yeah, it's an interesting schedule, but it's a very workable schedule. They can go 3-0, and if they go 3-0, they got a chance. I don't think Wisconsin is going to lose again. And if Wisconsin doesn't lose again, then Iowa doesn't have a chance at the West. But 10-2 without the West will be very disappointing. But that's all they can do at this point. You control your own destiny as far as it relates to your record. I mean, the best they can be is 10-2. So go out and be 10-2, whether that means you go to Indy or not.
As was mentioned a few times in the live chat, if we just dropped in on the Iowa football season after 9 games, didn't see the wins and losses, and we're given a 7-2 overall record and 4-2 in the Big Ten, well, it sounds like an Iowa season. It sounds like just run-of-the-mill Iowa. They're going to finish 8-4, 9-3, 10-2 possibly, but this is where they stand at 7-2. But arriving at this place has certainly been disappointing for Hawkeye Nation, with the buildup of the expectations and the 3 big wins earlier in the season: Penn State, Iowa State, Indiana, and then performing as they have the last 3 weeks.
All right. Can we get this most recent comment from Blake up here, where he says, I don't want Iowa to win the West. So Blake is one of our loyal listeners. I see him every week. He calls in. Come on, Blake. That is not a good attitude to have. I understand where he's coming from, where you don't want to win. I'm assuming it's because Iowa's offense is crap and they don't have a chance at the playoff, but you don't turn down a division title.
He doesn't say, no, I don't want to get embarrassed in a Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be it too. I don't know.
I don't think they get embarrassed. I just don't think this team's built that way. I just think they have too much pride and too much defensive prowess. I don't think they would get embarrassed.
Well, Mark, they got embarrassed against Purdue and Wisconsin. Those were embarrassing losses. Those were 3-score losses.
The score of the game wasn't as embarrassing to me as just watching the game unfold. Let's tack on a few more points for each team, and I don't know why this changes the dynamic, but it does for me. Let's say they lose to Wisconsin 41-21, not 27-7. Watching that game was painful to see the offense just not be able to muster anything. And the same thing with Purdue. That's why I found it more embarrassing than what the final score was.
Well, and that's how Iowa loses games. That's why I've heard that from fans this week. That's why it's so freaking frustrating, because that's how Iowa loses games. When they collapse, they collapse. And the offense can't do jack squat. Go back to 2017 against Wisconsin. They come off that Ohio State win. They come back, can't move the freaking ball, can't do a darn thing. Their 14 points are from Josh Jackson with 2 pick sixes. 2015, they found a way to beat Wisconsin, but Beathard threw for like 60 yards. I mean, that I don't see other teams doing that. It's so atrocious, and that's why I don't buy the argument. Now I'm kind of shifting back to the offensive coaching staff, and again, I'm not here to say anybody needs to be fired at this point. But I don't like when we make excuses for guys like Brian and say, well, Kirk hasn't given him the reins. Well, someone's got to be accountable. It's either Brian or it's Kirk or it's someone. Like, you can't just keep saying, well, I think it's Brian because, he's offense coordinator. Well, I think it's Kirk because he hasn't given Brian the reins. So we're just not going to do anything because we agree to disagree. Like, someone's got to be held accountable. I'm not saying you fire Kirk because, man, you do not fire Kirk given everything he's given to the program. I agree with that. But something, I don't know what it is, but something's got to happen, because you're right. Losing to Purdue and losing to Wisconsin the way they did, those are microcosms of how Iowa has lost big games over the course of many, many seasons, Mark. And it is terribly frustrating. They lose in the most, they just lose in the most maddening of ways. And, but again, I guess what I go back to my original statement from Blake's comment, if they find a way to win the West, if they win out to say just for the sake of this argument, Mark, because they didn't beat Northwestern and they got the win, and right, win's a win. They beat Northwestern, but it was not pretty. Say you beat Minnesota by 3, then you come back and you beat Illinois by 3, and then you beat Nebraska by 3, and then Minnesota beats Wisconsin, and Purdue loses to Ohio State. Iowa's your representative. Now we're going to say, well, their offense didn't improve, so I don't want to watch it. I mean, come on, you still won the West. You went 10-2. You can say we didn't deserve it, but that means they won it outright, Mark. It means they would have won it outright. So no tiebreakers involved, because they lost, 2 of the 3 most important tiebreakers here. So I just, I understand the frustration from Blake. I understand the frustration from a lot of fans. I'm frustrated by it myself, because I'm a fan at heart. But from this comment on the screen here, Purdue is a good team. Wisconsin is a good team. But this weekend will be telling if Iowa can Padilla is going to have to figure out a way to be able to use his feet effectively. And if he can do that, there'll be some excitement, at least with this offense. Even if it's not producing a lot of points, at least the offense can be somewhat invigorating.
And for those of you that sometimes make comments, just watching every detail of what's going on here, I am listening to everything Corey says. I was checking the lines for this weekend because I find some of these things interesting, of course. And I will note, join me on Patreon, 13-8 against the spread this past weekend, well over 60% for the season against the spread. Just as a side note, we don't have to get into this because we're talking Iowa, of course. But speaking of Purdue, they are a 20.5-point underdog at Ohio State. That's how Vegas still views those 2 teams. That's incredible to me.
That is incredible.
I thought that was going to be more in the 9 or 10.
And given the history, I mean, I know it was just one game, but the 2018 game, to me, that just proves that Braum. I mean, if we questioned Braum offensively before, and now we have an Ohio State defense that really isn't all that good and who's struggled these last couple of weeks, to me, that's a crazy line.
And then add up what just happened with Iowa against Northwestern, and you can't make this complete transition and connection, but still considering the struggle with Northwestern a 25-point underdog against Wisconsin. And then on top of that, the range of point spreads is about 4.5 to 5.5 in regards to Iowa being a favorite against Minnesota, which leads me, even though I'm leaning Iowa, to grab Minnesota in points, because points will be scarce, you would think, again this week. Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm, please join his YouTube channel, and of course subscribe on our Iowa channel as we head toward 1,000 subs. Minnesota, Iowa should be an intriguing game, and we bring in our guy Daniel House from Gophers Guru to break down the Minnesota side. So Corey, Daniel, Corey, you guys are two of my favorite college football guys. So it's going to be a treat for me to kick back and listen to you guys dice up the Hawkeyes and the Gophers.
Hey, good to see you guys.
Good to have you, Daniel.
So, Daniel, this curious, I'm going to start it out with one statement/question, and then I will let Corey take it from there because, again, I find the most pleasure in these situations is just kicking back and letting the two team experts go at it. This Minnesota season has been curious. My goodness. The Bowling Green loss, well documented, all that. Then they are seemingly on this roll. And then what happened last week? Your take on where Minnesota stands in mounting all of 6 points against Illinois and a team that was rushing for over 300 yards, couldn't crack 100 against Brett Bielema's squad.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster of a season. You summed it up perfectly. You start out Ohio State right out of the gates and competitive in the first half, and then things, fall apart. Jordan Howden gets hurt in the second half, and Ohio State pulls away. And then the Bowling Green game where, obviously everything goes amiss. You got long developing routes down the field and guys not getting open and pass protection not good. And then the theme followed. The Gophers got hot for 4 games, played really well, pounded the football, mixed in some passing on early downs, which I thought opened things up, and caught on a hot streak, and then played Illinois and did the same thing basically that went on against Bowling Green. You saw Illinois, what they wanted to do in that game was exploit a couple of things. First, they said, Minnesota's got young running backs. Let's mix up the blitz packages, and let's try to get those guys in positions where maybe they don't blitz protect well. That was a big issue. Then Minnesota got behind early, and this team is not built to play from behind. And Illinois scores 2 quick touchdowns. They're having a lot of success off stretch zone, and Minnesota's defense figures it out. 14 points right out of the get-go, shut them down for 3 quarters. Then the offense is unable to really do anything because Illinois, their game plan was centered around taking away the intermediate RPO game, the quick hitting stuff that Minnesota does really well. And they had Sidney Brown, the safety, coming down, robbing in the box. They had a linebacker spying a bit. So that's what you're going to see from teams that play Minnesota is they're going to try to take away the middle of the field. And Minnesota had man coverage, single high, a lot of cushion throughout the day, and they just didn't throw the ball out in space. They didn't use the screen game, and the offensive line did not protect well on the edge. Daniel Falele, Sam Schluter really struggled. And then they mixed in blitzes, and Minnesota didn't really have an answer for it with the screen game or anything. So a lot of long developing routes. Average depth of target was like 13.5 yards during the early stages of the game. Minnesota's at their best when that depth of target is, between 7 to 10 yards, and they're able to get their RPO game going and layer that with play action. So I'd say that's what has happened in the Bowling Green and Illinois games for Minnesota.
So I have a question for you, Daniel. Is Chris Ottman-Bell out this week?
Chris Ottman-Bell's actually expected to play. He practiced today. PJ Fleck said on his radio show, so he should be good to go. I'd say that's one of the things to watch for because Minnesota's wide receiver group, outside of Bell, hasn't been very good. Daniel Jackson's been battling. Injury came back, and then he's a young receiver. And then you also look at Dalen Wright, who's pretty rough around the edges but has a lot of talent. And Minnesota's wide receiver room just hasn't really taken that next step. So Bell has been a lot of the detention, bracket covering. But I know, Iowa, they'll probably play, they always play the 2 deep shell coverage. So that's what you get this week. And Minnesota's got to counter that with the quick game.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting. Before the season started, I was really high on Chris Ottman-Bell. And, just given the pedigree, I think of Tyler Johnson, I think of Rashad Bateman, and Ottman-Bell would kind of be the next guy in my mind. And I've said it all year, Mark. The Big Ten, this is not the year of the quarterback in the Big Ten. I think it's the year of the wide receiver with Dotson and Bell and Freifogel and Ottman-Bell and all these guys. And he was probably on my top 3 as far as receivers I was looking forward to seeing this year. And, of course, he's dealt with some injury issues.
Yep.
I will find it interesting. Tanner Morgan is one of the more, in my opinion, and this is just me from the outside, Daniel, looking in. Tyler, what did I just say? Who am I talking about? Tanner Morgan. Did I say Tyler Morgan? Get Tyler in my head. Tanner Morgan. Tanner Morgan is one of the more bipolar quarterbacks as far as season to season that I think I've seen. I mean, you think about 2 years ago, he was just lighting the world on fire, and he's sort of I don't know, digressed. Would you agree with that? Where's his headspace right now? Because he's stuck with it. He hasn't transferred out. Obviously, PJ has stuck with Tanner Morgan throughout all of it. Where is his headspace right now?
I think you look at 2019 and you see what the scheme looked like. RPO centric. You got two dynamic receivers that are in the NFL now, Tyler Johnson, Rashad Bateman, and then you had Bell in that room too. And Rodney Smith and Mo in the backfield with Shannon Brooks. That was a very talented skill position offense with Kirk Shiraka, who I thought was an excellent offensive coordinator, and layering from RPO to play action, really putting a lot of stress on defenses schematically. And Tanner really thrived in that system because he's got that quick release. He's mechanically a really good quarterback in that he does a lot of stuff with movement training. He has a kinesiologist he works with. Like the mechanical aspects of his game have always been strong. But now you look at this scheme, it's more of a vertical route offense where they're trying to push the ball downfield a lot. And Tanner's a very rhythmic quarterback. They got to get high percentage passing plays early, which allows him to then take shots downfield. Because I do think, touch is something that Tanner's really good at. He has great touch downfield. He's a really good red zone passer, but the scheme hasn't really suited his strengths at times. We saw flashes of it, but it hasn't really come together. And I also believe that the wide receiver room was always the X factor position group for the Gophers entering this season. And that position has had guys in and out. And Mike Brown-Stevens has been emerging a little bit, but is very inexperienced. That group outside of Bell has had a lot of development to do during the season. So I think it's a product of scheme. Tanner, tried to get used to that last year with the COVID thing and all that going on. And then he's had a lot of things go on personally with his dad passing away from brain cancer before the season started. And I mean, he is definitely the leader of this team. Like, you talk to every player at Minnesota and they'll always tell you that, like, Tanner is the guy that makes this thing go, and everybody rallies around him. And I honestly don't think there's a product of things going on here. It's like the inexperience of the running backs, the scheme, the receivers, Tanner maybe not executing in a few spots here and there. And, it's everybody. So hopefully they can eventually figure it out, but it hasn't reached that point yet.
Well, that's interesting. And I will say Minnesota is sort of the epitome for me of what makes college football so great. And I know Minnesota fans won't like hearing this, but like Bowling Green's not a good team. I mean, I believe they're bottom of their division right now in the MAC. And I'm not trying to insult Minnesota. They're just not a good team. And yet I give the Illinois you mentioned just schematics there. That Illinois loss, I give total credit to Brett Bielema because he did the same thing against Penn State. Just, again, out coaching the other side. I mean, and I hope that doesn't happen in a couple weeks to Iowa, but I wonder this too, and maybe you haven't heard anything about this in Gopherland, Daniel, but how much do you think PJ, just given who he is and the edge that he brings, and I'll just say this, a lot of Iowa fans, you probably know this, a lot of Iowa fans don't like PJ. Frankly, I don't think Kirk likes PJ.
Oh, wow.
And what happened last year up in Minneapolis. Like, is there a, I don't want to call it a vendetta, but will the 3 timeouts thing at the end of the game, will that get brought up this week in the locker room?
I don't think it's something. Minnesota, honestly, like, they don't get into that outside distraction stuff. Like, this team is very focused, and that's one thing that I will say about Minnesota and this team. It's so weird that they've been up and down, because I feel like this is one of the more connected and deep teams that they've had from top to bottom. It's just been a super weird year where, like, at the start of the season, Mo gets hurt, Trey Potts is out, Bryce Williams gets hurt, Bell's in and out on offense, and then all these pieces aren't really coming together. But the constant variables, but Minnesota's defense has been really good. I mean, their rush defense right now, they're 4th in rush defense EPA per play among Power 5 schools. Outside of the couple of scoring drives right at the start of the game against Illinois, I mean, it was stretch zone. Linebacker was just getting too far up the field. They made the adjustment, set the edge a little better, brought a nickel corner into run fit, and they fixed it. Joe Rossi, the defensive coordinator, has done an outstanding job with the Gophers defense. Their defensive line is the strength of the team, and I think that's what I'm looking for in this game against Iowa. Is Iowa's offensive line has not impressed me. Mason Richmond's out. Jack Plum playing at left tackle. You got Sezi Atomiwo, Boye Mafe, Thomas Rush, all have had really good seasons. And then at right tackle with Nick DeYoung, one of the worst pass protectors on the team high 19 pressures. That's the matchup that I'm watching in this one, is Minnesota's D-line versus Iowa's O-line, because the D-line has been the strength for Minnesota this year.
Well, I'll be anxious to see that too, because I want to know how aggressive PJ and this defense will be against, because this is a new quarterback too. I mean, that's the one thing you didn't mention. You got Alex Padilla in here. So, normally you would look at that as an opponent, and I think you'd say this is an advantage. We got a second string guy. This is his first career start.
Yeah.
But honestly, if I was a Gopher fan, I would rather be playing Spencer Petrus right now. Like, I'd rather Spencer Petrus be healthy, because I think a healthy Spencer right now, given what we heard from Kirk today and Kirk after the game on Saturday, and I could be wrong about this, but I think a healthy Spencer is the starter right now. So that's the one thing that I question. How aggressive will Minnesota be, given the fact that Alex Padilla is a guy who can be mobile? Of course, he's going to be limited in the pocket. I mean, Iowa's they're not going to turn into a spread offense all of a sudden. But his ability to scramble and get away from pressure is going to be huge. And you mentioned it, the defensive line, Iowa's offensive line has not been good. And you're right about Richmond. I don't know that you're going to see a huge drop off with Jack Plum, because Jack Plum has been rotating at right tackle a lot. He played left tackle. I thought he played left tackle well last year. They liked Richmond heading into the season, so they started him, but I think Plum will be okay. But again, you're right. The tackles have not been good all year. I talked with Mark here before you got on. The guard play should be a little bit better. They're getting back Cody Ince this week. And if they can get, I don't know how close to game speed he'll be, if he'll be able to take half the snaps or less. But if Ince, Schott, and Linderbaum can anchor the middle, yeah, it'll come down to those tackle positions. And again, Alex Padilla's ability to get out of the pocket, step up in the pocket, which is something Spencer Petrus has never really got down, which I blame QB development there. But and then, of course, the Minnesota offensive line, everybody talks about it. Kirk talked about it today. I think he said, and I haven't confirmed this, and maybe he was just joking, he said the seventh guy in Minnesota's rotation is like 320 pounds. Is that right?
Yeah, they have one of the biggest offensive lines out there. I mean, it's the cliche is they always compare it to the NFL offensive lines. It's like the free bingo space on the broadcast, because they always bring up how big the O-line is.
Well, I will say this, though. Here's an area, and Mark, you can probably validate this from your knowledge, your knowledge of college football. That is an area, although Iowa's pass rush has not been that good this year, and I've been the first to say that. It's been underwhelming. They don't have an A.J. Epinesa, Anthony Nelson, Drew Ott type player. But if you can get Minnesota into 3rd and long, and you can start putting them in obvious passing down situations, sometimes those bigger guys, and we saw it late in the Illinois game. I didn't watch the whole game, but you saw Illinois be able to take advantage of some of these bigger guys in pass rush. Now, Tanner I loved the call, by the way, on 4th and 1 to get their one touchdown, the rollout. I wish Iowa would do that as opposed to run 2 quarterback sneaks back-to-back, 2 fullbacks, dives back-to-back. That was a beautiful call, but it showed, even though it was only 1 yard, it showed Tanner Morgan's ability to scramble too. So I'm not real confident in that being a key for Iowa to succeed here. But to me, you obviously have to stop Minnesota's run. You guys are down to your 4th running back. I mean, it's just insane. Now they're all playing well. They just, Kirk talked about that today as well. You guys just have guys stepping in, and it's like, where are these guys coming from? And obviously it helps when you have a tremendous offensive line. Wisconsin's a prime example of that over the years. I mean, but it's just ridiculous how I really did think when Ibrahim went down week 1 or week 0, whatever that week 1, I thought that was it for Minnesota's run game, and they just continue to filter out new guys.
Yeah, Kenny Burns, great running backs coach, has done a phenomenal job of developing guys up. They've recruited the position well, and with Minnesota having a really good offensive line, that's helped them continue to run the ball well. And I honestly, I think the biggest thing for Minnesota is sometimes they lean too much on a run, where, especially on early downs, they got to get in a rhythm and slowly turn the dial to playing physical football. You look at the game scripts like against Nebraska, where they're high percentage passes, getting the RPO game going, and then eventually layering that down to play action and turning the dial towards playing physical football, taking some pressure out of the box. And I think you summed it up perfectly when you said getting Minnesota into long down and distance situations. You don't want to be in 2nd and long and 3rd and long consistently, because that's where Minnesota hasn't been as effective this year. I believe 1st down is the biggest down for Minnesota, just to be able to get in a position where they can get ahead of the sticks. Iowa, they have one of the better standard downs defenses in the nation. I believe it's like a top 3 unit in that area. So Minnesota has to be able to get positive yardage, especially on 1st down, because Iowa, you look at their tendencies, they love the blitz on 2nd and long specifically. If they're going to do it, they'll bring an extra rusher. And so that's something that I'm watching in this game as well. Can Minnesota be efficient on early downs and do a good job in that area? And I think, you said it well, too, with the offensive line. They've struggled a little bit more with movement when they've had blitzers coming other ways and, stunts and twists, those type of things. So maybe that's something that Iowa uses a lot of. But, with the 2 deep shell coverage, you got to be able to, settle into the soft spots of that and get some high percentage completions early. And you mentioned Minnesota's defense. Minnesota's defense is not, they'll be aggressive on 3rd down occasionally, but they use a lot of simulated pressure. So it looks like they'll send 5 or 6 guys and, they're only sending 4, but they're bringing in a different rusher and dropping a defensive end, do that a lot. And Rossi will be disguising things. He mixes coverages a lot and looks. So Minnesota's defense has played extremely well. I have no concerns with Minnesota's defense whatsoever. This game could really come down to field position, though, because Minnesota is a top 15 team in field position margin. Iowa's number 1. The turnover battle should be key because I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. It'll be close. And, a couple plays here and there could really change the outcome of the game.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that Iowa's 2 losses this year were when they got destroyed on turnovers. Every other game, I think the only games they played even, I'm just quoting this by memory, I think were Kent State and Colorado State, and neither of those games Iowa was real dominant in. So, yeah, turnovers will be huge. I do think it'll be interesting, Mark, and this is another thing that I like to bring up about PJ. He needs a get-back guy. One of those guys that he's always on the field, man. Like, I don't watch much Minnesota football, Daniel. I really don't. Not that I don't have anything against Minnesota, but I turn on the TV on Saturday to the Minnesota game, and he's out there jumping up and down like a college kid. Like, get your guy back. As you remember, 2 years ago in Iowa City, the whole wasn't there an unsportsmanlike penalty or a sideline violation or whatever because he was out there. And now I know he said he was with his injured player, but this seems to be an issue. Like, doesn't he know to stay off the field?
Before Daniel jumps in to give us he'll probably have a metric on this. You probably have caught up to this, Corey, at this point. He's probably got this charted somewhere. PJ Fleck, in my perspective on it, the guy basically can't do anything wrong. I'm a huge PJ Fleck fan.
Wow.
Enormous PJ Fleck guy.
Wow.
I just think he's outstanding.
I personally don't have necessarily an issue with him. I do think the timeout issue last year was totally instigated by PJ, like early in that drive. I'd have to watch it. I mean, I've watched that game back in forever, but that was instigated by PJ. I mean, can we be honest here, Daniel?
Oh, you know what? It was hilarious, that whole thing, just because Ferentz was talking about it after the game and PJ wasn't going to get into it. And then I just love those little petty things in the rivalries that it always brings out the best. It's like Scott Frost and PJ. I feel like Scott Frost and PJ might be bigger than Ferentz and PJ at this point because I don't know what it is, but I think it's just the whole sloganeering thing he said at media days where it might be just a little bit more angst between those two. But I don't know. Minnesota hasn't won a game at Iowa City since 1999. I was 3 years old. I was thinking about that today. That's
an insane hard to fathom. That's crazy. Isn't that crazy, Mark?
And it's every other year, just like any other series in the Big Ten,
rivalry.
correct?
It's a trophy game. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing we haven't talked about, the pig. I mean, we got to get the pig back. We have the pig, right? You guys got to get the pig back. But that's just an insane number. And I will say this, as far as the game last year, one thing that stood out to me, as I recall, now again, it seems like that COVID year was so long ago, but Minnesota had a lot of issues just in general last year with special teams. Now I know some of that was COVID related. I did see something in the chat about an injured kicker. So where are we at right now with Minnesota on special teams?
Matthew Trickett missed he missed an extra point, missed a field goal in the last game. It's just been sporadic, hit or miss, missing field goals. And then he's been super consistent and made kicks in stretches of games. It's just, there hasn't been that ability to rely on the kicker and go, this guy's going to make it. That's been something that I would watch in the games here. Just the last game was just weird in that sense that he was not very accurate. And then the punting game, Mark Crawford's been really good, I think, at flipping the field. In fact, a couple games where he's punted very well and actually helped the team win the game against Purdue because he was flipping the field so well. And so I'm excited. It's a battle of Aussie punters. I love when we have the Aussie punter battle where we got Tory Taylor versus Mark Crawford, two Australian punters.
Well, and you're not going to get a better pair of punters. I mean, as far as I can just speak specifically for Tory. I mean, the guy just shows up every week and does his job. And you talked about how well Minnesota's played defensively. That you're absolutely right. I do remember the missed extra point last week for special teams, but defense and special teams are just going to be huge. And I mean, Northwestern's defense really isn't that good, and Iowa still only scored 17 points. So, unless Padilla just comes into this game and just starts going hog wild, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. Unless that were to happen, this is going to be a low scoring game. So yeah, Tory Taylor is going to be a huge key for Iowa fans. Like Iowa's wins this year, their best wins, like most dominant wins. We're talking Indiana, Maryland, Iowa State. All those games were won by multiple scores. Special teams and defense. I mean, obviously Iowa has forced a ton of turnovers in those wins, but the biggest underrated part of that was field position. You can even say the Penn State game. I mean, Tory Taylor's ability to continually pin Roberson back against his own goal line was huge. But again, the difference here is I do have a lot of faith in Tanner Morgan. I've talked about his struggles earlier, but to me, if I had to take one guy into a battle, it would probably be Tanner Morgan, because who's more experienced across the Big Ten? Maybe Adrian Martinez. I mean, to me, all his struggles have been well documented, but I like Tanner Morgan, and I liked him for 3 years now.
He's 24-11 as a starter. He's 24-11 as a starter. I mean, that's a good record in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it is.
What were you saying, Mark?
I was basically just going to take my shot at Tanner Morgan and Adrian Martinez by telling you that wasn't necessarily the best case to make for experience being
what 11 and 2 though 2 years ago. Right?
I know he went 11 and 2, and I think he's a good quarterback. I just it's been a combination of everything that Daniel's outlined for us in regards to the playmakers not being anything close to what they were 2 years ago, but there has to be some regression there. 6 touchdowns and 7 picks. And he was at 52% at one point this season. I'm sure that's increased some, but not a lot.
Yeah, it's sort of odd. And who was the backup? Who was the other quarterback in 2019 that we thought was going to start?
Zach Annexstad. Yep.
Yeah, and what happened to Annexstad?
He's still there. He's backing up.
Still there?
Yeah, he's still there.
Wow.
And he's one of the great trivia answers of all time. Correct, Daniel? Is he not along with Baker Mayfield, the only true freshman,
I believe walk-on
quarterback. Thank you.
Yep.
True freshman walk-on quarterback to start a Power 5 game in his first game. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, excuse my ignorance, and I'm going to get ripped for this later, but Baker Mayfield was a walk-on?
Yes.
See, that's how little I know about. That's how little I know about Baker Mayfield. That's an incredible. That's incredible.
Not to break the momentum of the conversation, a couple things, because I want to clean up the super chats that have come in. I want to honor those and also let you guys know that I certainly want to respect your time. I only have about 3 more minutes, but you guys can continue the stream if you'd like past that. But we'll get to these super chats. Dave Valinsky underlining what Daniel was talking about concerning the over-under 37. You take these two teams and you throw Wisconsin in the mix, and it seems like every over-under that these three teams play is about 36 or 37. That's just kind of what it is. The 2016 game he's bringing up, don't know the significance of that one, but go Gophers. And
2016, hold on, let's address that for a second. So that was the Beathard year. It was a disappointing year, and I'm trying to think, was that the year? Do you remember this game?
Yeah,
Daniel?
it was 14-7. Yeah, it was 14-7 with Leitner. It was that really low-scoring, ugly game.
It was the shot over the top to Noah Fant, and then he did the row the boat.
Yep. That was the game.
Okay, I remember the game. Yeah, in fact, Iowa had a I remember that because Iowa.
That was not the game because it had been 2016. It was the year before PJ.
Oh, you're right.
PJ came, yeah.
So 14-7 in 16?
14-7 in 16, yep.
Well, what the heck was that game, man? I usually have a better idea of contests. Man, I don't remember that game. I'll have to think back. I know that was obviously a disappointing year. Maybe that's why I don't remember it. I don't know. That would have been in Minneapolis because
Yeah, it was in Minneapolis, and Wadley had 1 touchdown, 107 yards.
Oh, I do
Yes, he
remember that
did.
game. That was a snooze fest. That was a snooze fest. It was close, and I believe Minnesota had a chance, and I think maybe got away with a pass interference from Greg Maben late in that game. If I recall, that might have been the game I'm thinking of.
I love this name for Big Ten football fans. Mitch Leidner at quarterback for Minnesota. Yes.
Oh, yeah, Leidner. By the way, real quickly, that was a 2016. The reason I remember that game, it was a Beth Mowins game. Okay, so that, I'll just say that I do remember the game, and because Wadley had one big play, and that was it. I mean, it was a snooze fest. Wadley had a big run, and I just remember Beth Mowins.
So it was an ESPN2 game.
Yeah, probably 2016, right? Beth Mowins.
I think we could turn on ESPN2 this Saturday afternoon, and we'll find Beth Mullins doing the game.
And Iowa hasn't gotten a Beth Mowins game, and they're not going to. Right? I mean, I think, am I correct in saying, so I know Illinois is FS1. The game this week is on what channel? I don't even know. Is it FS1?
It's BTN.
It's BTN, so you're not going to get Beth Mowins. I think the Nebraska game on Black Friday, they're not putting Beth Mowins on Black Friday for that game, Mark. So I don't think Iowa gets Beth Mowins this year.
That's not a Fox game?
It might be a Fox game.
It might be.
No, sometimes it's ABC. Sometimes they put it on ABC. In the past, they have. I don't know.
Get business credit. We appreciate your contribution, sir. Thank you so much for that. Hi, Mark. Hope all is well. Hope all is well with you, too. So thank you so much for that.
Well, Mark, if you have 10 more minutes, I do have a couple other questions. You have a few extra minutes, Mark, and you can excuse yourself whenever you're ready. I do have a question for you real quick, Daniel, and it's relating to PJ, and we just lost Mark, so good to have you on, Mark. But in relation to PJ Fleck, has he been on the hot seat since he's gotten there? Because the outside noise, I don't want to call it noise, but just the aura around Minnesota, there's all this hype about PJ and about James Franklin taking other jobs, but I never ever hear anything about his head coaching spot at Minnesota being either on the line or really anything tangible that tells me he's going to leave for another job. So do Minnesota fans feel pretty secure with the future of the program right now?
Yeah, PJ Fleck actually signed a contract extension last week, 7-year contract extension. It's more like a 2-year edition because the buyout next year, over the next year is $10 million, and the second year it's $7 million. So I would say that Minnesota fans are looking for consistency from the program. Sustainability is the big thing that athletic director Mark Coyle's talked about. Having the same guy, trying to build a model like Wisconsin and Iowa, for example, just being able to have a coach that has his way of doing it, recruits well, develops talent. I think PJ Fleck, the strength with his teams is the ability to recruit and develop talent. And I noticed tangible progress in both of those areas. And, you look at 2019, phenomenal season, one of the best in Gopher football history. I mean, they hadn't won more than 10 games since 1904. So to be able to do that, and then 2020, just a weird outlier of a season for everybody. I mean, Minnesota had COVID issues, 40 players out, still won at Nebraska. But, then this year it's been a rocky road up and down. But you see the program elevating up still. I feel like they, some of the losses that they've had have just been perplexing in nature, but yet again, they still find ways to, beat the teams that they should beat in the Big Ten West for the most part, but then lose to teams like Bowling Green and Illinois. It's such a weird season in that respect. So I look at the whole program, what he's doing, in recruiting, player development, the future outlook. There's no doubt that he's done a phenomenal job of elevating recruiting footprint for Minnesota.
Okay, so what I hear all the time from Iowa people is that their criticism of PJ and why they don't like PJ, and then why Kirk doesn't like PJ, and of course it's never come out of Kirk's mouth, at least not publicly, is that PJ is a self-promoter. Your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at what PJ's done up here with, I think people don't really realize what Row the Boat is. It's something that he developed. His son passed away, and he developed this Row the Boat. It's like a lifestyle, work, never give up mantra type of thing. And he's really made a difference with it in the community and giving back to the Masonic Children's Hospital. Like there's a wall at the Masonic Children's Hospital with, it's Roll the Boat. The Fleck family contributes to it. I know I've been around a lot of families that have been impacted by some of the things and the initiatives that the Flecks have done. So, not a lot of people see that side of it, that, what he does with Roll the Boat and how he's really impacted the Twin Cities community in that respect. But, PJ, I think he's so energetic. He's that way all the time. Like as someone who's around the program, like PJ Fleck has that energy level all the time. You never see it die. And I think that resonates with players. I think there's certain players that like you have to be cut from a different cloth to play in a system like this and, come to this culture and do this. But that's what Minnesota's looking for. They're trying to find the right player for what they're doing here. And I think PJ's done a nice job of finding the fits. And, people love him in Minnesota up here. I think he's a very popular coach and situated in a pro sports market in a program that hasn't really been consistent. He gets the chance to really try to make his mark on it.
Question here from Jack. I want to answer this. Alex Padilla is the starter this week, and Kirk was pretty straightforward about that, which surprised me a little bit because, and maybe there's nothing to this, but to me, this could have easily been an opportunity for Kirk to be coy and leave PJ Fleck guessing.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit surprised today. He did say that Alex is the starter. I mean, he would, obviously we're going to evaluate Spencer day by day. The question was asked of him if Spencer was 100%, is he the starter? And he didn't really answer that question. So, maybe there is some doubt left with PJ Fleck, but by all accounts, Alex Padilla is the starter this week. I actually do believe, and I don't know how much Iowa football you've watched to this point, Daniel, but I do believe Iowa would benefit from running both Alex and Spencer at times just because they bring totally different skill sets. It's not like a situation in 2014 at Iowa where you have Jake Rudock and CJ Beathard that are both kind of the same. I mean, obviously people loved CJ and he brought a different element of the game, but like they were kind of the same quarterback. These guys are different. Alex Padilla is 6'6", can run, has got a good, accurate arm, quick release. Whereas Spencer, I like to think that Spencer is exceptional with the deep ball. We haven't seen it in recent games, but he is a statue in the quarterback. So, I'm not a fan of just eliminating Spencer Petrus from the game plan, but it does not sound like he's healthy this week. And, Kirk keeps saying, well, he wasn't able to throw the ball effectively. He keeps using that term. He's not able to throw the ball effectively, which leaves fans thinking, well, he's never thrown the ball effectively, like injury or not. But I do think there's an injury there. The good news for Iowa fans who are concerned about leadership, because of course the quarterback position is essential for leadership on a football team, at any level, is Spencer, as soon as he went out on Saturday, was wearing a red hat and was on the sidelines giving Alex support. So I do find it somewhat intriguing, and I haven't went back and really calculated, and maybe you can give us some insight on this, Daniel, but how Minnesota matches up against mobile quarterbacks as opposed to more of your statues in the pocket, because it seems like, at least across the Big Ten, the majority of quarterbacks are mobile, or at least somewhat mobile. Tanner Morgan's a perfect example of a guy who I don't think of as a runner, but he is mobile. He can move if necessary, whereas Spencer Petrus is kind of the outlier. So is there data to support that? Is it favorable that Iowa has a mobile quarterback as opposed to a statue this week?
Minnesota's done a nice job with mobile quarterbacks this year. I mean, they had to play Adrian Martinez, they had to play Brendan Lewis at Colorado, a couple guys that move and extend plays. And Minnesota's been so disciplined up front, and they've made a big emphasis on rushing lanes, rushing depth, the interior, being able to push that and limit escape lanes. That's actually been a very big strength of Minnesota's. They haven't allowed the quarterback to step out of the pocket, extend plays downfield. You're not seeing that a lot of explosive plays defensively, especially through the air. Minnesota's done a nice job of limiting that. When they have come, it's been just, blowing assignments, eye discipline in the wrong spot or something like that. I mean, you look at Iowa, I think what's really hurt them offensively is not being able to be really effective on standard downs. They can't really find a rhythm. Then they're behind the sticks, and Petrus is not very mobile, so he's more of a statue in the pocket. And I feel like he doesn't take a lot of chances either, where I feel like Padilla will just kind of let it rip and he'll go for it and he'll move out of the pocket. And, they can use the boot game and use that mobility, get him out of the pocket. I think that's something that you might see from Iowa a bit against Minnesota is the boot game with the stretch zone and trying to mess with the discipline of Minnesota's defense, get those deep crossers going. I just think that Padilla's got a lot more intriguing upside than Petrus. I don't think I've been waiting to see if Petrus would take the next step or, if there's something unlocked there. Padilla feels like he has upside from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah. And we had an interesting comment from a viewer during our postgame show on Saturday. And the question was basically, do you think Iowa coaches are concerned about being proven wrong? Because they've ridden Spencer Petrus, and that may seem like kind of a juvenile thing to even bring up, but there might be some substance to that. Like, they've continued to endorse Spencer. And here's the other thing about it. This coaching staff has repeatedly said that Spencer is far and away the number one quarterback on this team. So that's totally different than what we dealt with Rudock and Beathard. Like in 2013, when Rudock won that job, the coaches were very clear. Cody Sokol, who later transferred and had a nice career at Louisiana Tech, Cody Sokol, Jake Rudock, and CJ Beathard were neck and neck. So it was a little bit easier, I think, to make that move in 14. Whereas, this year, and Kirk keeps falling back on we've won 12 of 14 games with Spencer. Coach Don Patterson, he says it himself. Quarterbacks get way too much, especially in Iowa system, way too much credit when you win, and probably too much blame when you lose.
So true.
And so I'm very slow to credit Spencer for the 12-game winning streak and whatnot. Again, if you watch the games, you look at even just looking at the stat sheet, you should be able to tell that. Yeah, he cut down on turnovers after that Northwestern loss in 2020. And of course, Iowa's defense has created turnovers at a rate no one else in the country has. So I wonder if there's some pride there about not wanting to just admit that, hey, Alex is a gamer. Now, I'm not saying he is the gamer, but at some point, if that's proven, for instance, this week, if he comes in, and I don't expect this to happen, Daniel, but if he comes in and throws for 250 yards, which is a ton of yards for an Iowa quarterback, especially against the Gopher defense, it'll be interesting to see where Iowa's coaching staff, what they say as far as moving forward, because at some point you got to do what's best in the interest of the team.
I think the biggest issue for Iowa is the inability to run the ball, and I think their rushing scheme, that they don't use enough motion. It sometimes feels pretty predictable what they're doing with their running scheme, and I've been waiting to see, are they going to put some motion into their offense? I think that's something that you notice across college football is teams are really starting to put that in, especially after the wave of NFL squads doing it. The teams that have that are very effective. I thought Iowa's defense struggled with the motion a little bit against Purdue, and I thought it got them some really schemed open throws against Iowa's defense. And so, I think Iowa passing the ball on early downs a little bit more, Padilla, trying to get some high percentage throws. Minnesota will play probably a lot of zone coverage, keeping everything in front of them, but they'll mix it up if they get you behind the sticks, and Rossi's very aggressive in that respect and mixes things up. So if Iowa wants to be efficient offensively, they got to be really good on first and second down, because Minnesota's got one of the best passing down defenses in the nation. They have like the third best passing down success rate right now in the nation. So you want to stay ahead of the sticks if you're Iowa.
It's another reason for Iowa fans to be excited about having Alex this week as opposed to Spencer, because you tee off on Spencer and it's over. It's just over as an Iowa fan or as an offensive lineman or quarterback. So it should be interesting. I think the Fleck versus Ferentz I don't want to call it a feud because I don't think there's anything there, but it's sort of like Ferentz Franklin. Like, I just think it's obvious there's not a whole lot of, maybe there's respect there. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but that will be sort of interesting. And certainly, can Minnesota continue to sustain this running attack? It's just been incredible to me. Both teams are still in competition for the West. I don't know how optimistic are Minnesota fans right now. Obviously the Illinois loss hurts because you're leading the division. You're in control of your own destiny. But I guess technically you still are. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, you went out. You still have everything in front of you. And that's what PJ Fleck's been stressing is, hey, everything is still there. And I thought I thought Illinois coached a phenomenal game. I thought that Ryan Walters' defensive scheme, Aaron Henry's a really good defensive backs coach. Like, they had Minnesota scheme perfect, and you'll probably see some replication of that moving forward. But Minnesota, yeah, I think people don't know what to expect from the offense, because there hasn't been a moment where they've like put together a performance where like, this is complete. It's always felt like there's maybe something missing. They're not efficient on this down. They're maybe not running the ball well. They don't pass enough. They're not attacking this. They're waiting for Minnesota to put together a sound offensive performance. And the Bowling Green and Illinois games were just an example of, a really odd, different scheme from what you saw in film, throwing the Gophers off, and then they weren't really able to adjust. Illinois stopped the run. So maybe Phil Parker's got something, stowed away, some type of scheme that he hasn't put out there that he'll throw at Minnesota.
The answer to that,
I bet it's too deep shell, but
the answer to that question is no. He doesn't have anything stored away, because
3-3-5 defense.
They did run a little of that against Northwestern, but here's the deal. You watch the Purdue game, and if you followed Iowa football over the course of 5 years, there has been no adjustments to combat what Purdue brings to the table every single year. So as much as I love Phil Parker, he's on my top 3 for coaches that I would at least talk to about replacing Kirk Ferentz when that time comes. He is stubborn, and I think that comes from the head coach. That trickles on down. So I don't expect a whole lot of ingenuity. The whole 4-2-5, this cash, what we call it, the cash defense, which really all it is a nickel defense. Yeah, that's all it is. But we like to put these fancy names in it because we're not used to anything different here in Iowa. That is really and that's basically all we've seen as far as adjustments over the course of many seasons. Now, in Phil's defense, this defense has been elite, but stubbornness is an issue. It's a bugaboo. Again, Purdue being a perfect example of that. The good news is, if you're an Iowa fan, again, if you're trying to bank on adjustments, theoretically, if you look at the history of this rivalry, Iowa-Minnesota, Iowa hasn't needed to make a ton of adjustments. This has been a pretty one-sided rivalry in recent years, right, Daniel? I mean, you would agree with that. I'm not trying to lord it over you or anything.
Yeah,
but
I mean, Minnesota hasn't won a game at Iowa City since 1999. I mean, that's the telling thing there. Yeah. I mean, that's unbelievable. It just, I think this rivalry is stronger than it's ever been on the Minnesota side. Like, just talking to fans, that this is a game that Minnesota fans really want to win this week. I think if you're a Minnesota fan, just gauging people, if they win this game and they beat Wisconsin, the Bowling Green and the Illinois games will be an afterthought. But
absolutely, yeah.
That people want to see these rivalries get back to being very competitive both ways.
Absolutely, and certainly Iowa fans want to win. But I use the example of Nebraska. Iowa's owned that rivalry, but they've been a lot of close games. Now, the Minnesota-Iowa game wasn't close last year, but that doesn't mean it's going to be close this year. 2019 was close. Iowa State, same thing. A lot of close games, but Iowa's owned that rivalry. So 3 of Iowa's 4 trophy games throughout the year have been one-sided. Problem is, you look at the flip side of that as an Iowa fan, Wisconsin, Purdue, they've had Iowa's numbers. Iowa makes no adjustments. And so, my thoughts on this, and I don't know if I'm not going to put you on the spot here, Daniel, but as far as predictions, that 37-point over-under is right. I mean, that's basically every Iowa game now. I think Wisconsin might have been less than that. But I think last week was probably, I could be wrong, Iowa Northwestern. It was probably close to that as well. This is going to be one of the more predictable Iowa teams to predict as far as score here on out. But the one X factor is Padilla. I'm not saying he's going to set the world on fire, but you change your quarterback position, it can either go one way or the other quickly.
Yeah, and if Minnesota creates a couple takeaways here or there, and you're with a short field or you get a defensive score, this is a game where turnovers and field position will be premium. And the Gophers have been very efficient defensively. They've been really good in field position margin this year. Iowa's been very good in that area. So it's like, who doesn't make the mistake? Who has the better scheme? I think the biggest thing with Minnesota is you don't know what type of offensive scheme you'll get. Honestly, I think there's been some moments this year where it feels like Minnesota has planned ahead for other stuff or saved things, trying to just do the bare minimum to get through some of these games, and maybe it's burned them a little bit. But I expect Minnesota will come out with some different wrinkles because this is a huge game for the program. You know, PJ Fleck wants to beat. He's 1-7 against Iowa and Wisconsin. To take that next step as a program, they got to start winning these rivalry games, and so PJ definitely wants that.
Hey, I'm all in for you guys beating Wisconsin. I'm all in for that. Just not this weekend. All right, Dave Valinsky, I want to give credit to his. I almost said Snapchat. What are we talking about here? Super Chat. He says, I was at the 2016 game, fell asleep. That tells you how bad the game was. 14-10 Minnesota is my prediction. Now, Dave is a Minnesota fan. I'm confident of that. I've seen him on here before. But it could be a game very much like that 2016 game. Like one big run play could determine it, and it could be either way. Because Iowa, as much as they've struggled in the run game, the best, as far as Tyler Goodson's best days have been, Indiana, where you break loose for a 50-yard scamper, or you have a Colorado or a Kent State where you run for a couple 40-yard runs. So Iowa does have the ability to knock off the long ball with the run game, and certainly Minnesota's run game is capable of that as well. So that certainly could be the difference. Special teams is going to be huge, though. I mean, there's no question. Punting and field position.
The weird thing is the question marks are offense for both of these teams because both defenses are playing well. I think Iowa has an edge in special teams, but field position, Minnesota's been good in that respect too. So, like, this matchup is really intriguing for me. It comes down to who's a little bit more creative offensively.
Absolutely. You're not going to get creativity out of Iowa. Let's hope Alex Padilla will bring some of it himself.
But are they holding some of it back? That's what I was.
No, they're not holding. They are not holding any of it back, Daniel. Okay, they're not holding any of it.
Holding them back. That's what I'm saying, though.
Oh, is Petrus holding them back?
Yeah, that's my question.
Look, I don't want to get into a whole debate about coaching staff, but I look at play calling and the ineptitude play calling wise, and I love Kirk Ferentz. Kirk Ferentz is all I know. I'm 25 years old. I mean, I was born in '96, and believe me, I wasn't watching football as a toddler. So when I started watching football, it was Kirk Ferentz, and I love Kirk Ferentz, but the play calling, whether it's Kirk or it's Brian, has been terrible. Okay, I'm not going to sugarcoat that because I like the guy, and that tells me that it's not Spencer Petrus as much as maybe he has contributed to it with his inabilities in certain areas. I don't think Iowa has proven, the play calling wise, the coaching staff has not proven that, hey, we're doing everything we can to put our quarterback in a good position to succeed. Mm-hmm. So I understand. I mean, again, you have a totally different element now with having a guy who can run this week. So maybe you will see a big difference.
Do they use the boot game and try to move him a little bit more because he's got that skill? I don't know, but
well, a perfect example of this, and I've talked about it with Mark and with Coach Patterson. The very first, and you probably missed it. I don't know if you watched the Iowa-Wisconsin game 2 weeks ago, but the first play from scrimmage, Iowa comes out in naked with Spencer Petrus, which is the stupidest call you can ever do on 1st and 10 to start a game against Wisconsin, against that 3-4 defense, and with a quarterback who can't run, so you have no threat of a QB draw. Like, I would actually prefer, now that we have Alex Padilla, maybe that's an opportunity to run naked again, because it looks stupid, but now actually you have an element of run. That's an example of that. But now that you're right, that now you have a mobile quarterback, it offsets some of that.
Yeah, I'm fascinated, especially considering that they had Padilla at the end, the second half of the last game. It's like, do they expand off of that in preparation for Minnesota? Did they get him in just to get a taste of that ahead of this game? I don't know.
As an Iowa guy, I'm used to the lack of creativity. So I do want to address this question, Gary, because I don't want to ignore him. It was a specific question. He asks, what broad area should Iowa football self-evaluate after 21 college football season? Obviously, play calling would be right in line with what we were just talking about. Again, I'm not going to address specific coaching changes or changes that I feel need to be made until the season's over. I just don't think it's the right time for Iowa to make those changes, even if they are going to at some point. But yeah, play calling, like the offensive line woes have been issues. There's so many different directions you can go, but play calling has been a consistent issue over the course of as long as I can remember. I mean, I feel it's gotten worse with Brian, just my opinion, but certainly play calling would be where I'd go. And I want to give a shout out to your stuff, Daniel. How can people follow you on social media? Of course, you're gophersguru.com.
Yes, you can follow me on Twitter at DanielHouseNFL and check out the Gophers content at gophersguru.com.
Appreciate the time, Daniel. And for anybody not aware, let me post this up. Let's see if I can find my little banner for the game this weekend. No, I've got it here somewhere. And if anybody did miss, it is a 2:30 kick. Post this up here. And of course, if you are an Iowa fan or a Minnesota fan, we will be live after the game on Saturday with Coach Don Patterson for Iowa post game at the Voice of College Football. And we'll talk all about, hopefully for Iowa fans, an Iowa win, for Gopher fans, a Gopher win. And I want to put this plug in too for Iowa basketball. If you're an Iowa basketball fan, we'll be doing our post game show over at From the Hawkeye of the Storm this evening on YouTube. From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube this evening. Daniel, it's been a pleasure, and may the best farmer win on Saturday.
Appreciate it. Had a fun. Looking forward to the game.
All right, for Daniel House and Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm, we will talk to you soon.